Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The government is pretty good about hiring people with disabilities, but sometimes not so good at keeping them. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission did a detailed study of what it takes to retain people with disabilities. Here with what they found, the social science research analyst in the EEOC's Office of Federal Operations, Karen Brummond. Ms. Brummond, good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
This is a study you do regularly, right, to monitor how much people are staying that have disabilities that get hired by federal agencies?
So it's not like our annual report where we do it on an annual basis, but we write a variety of topical reports on various EEO subjects, whether it be on the life cycle and employment of persons with disabilities in the federal workforce, or the use of Schedule A employment for persons with disabilities. We've also written ones that are more about race and gender. We cover all different topics.
And right. And so the challenge is keeping people once you hire them. I guess that's true for all people, including people with disabilities. But interestingly, you found some variables. You reduced this to 4 variables that you said were, quote, significantly associated with fewer voluntary separations. And what were those variables?
We were looking at retention of persons with disabilities in fiscal year 2020 to see what variables out of a wide variety of policies and practices were associated with fewer voluntary separations, so removals. There were fewer voluntary separations of persons with disabilities at agencies that had compliant, reasonable accommodation programs, that had compliant programs for personal assistance services requests, and that had published their procedures for personal assistance services requests on their public website. And the one about processing requests and having a compliant procedures for that applied to whether they had established it as of 2019 and as of 2020.
Right. So putting it another way, if you're going to hire people with disabilities, you have to be prepared with the compliant systems and the accessibility features that you need to be able to accommodate them so that they can work fully and feel like they really belong.
Absolutely. For people with disabilities, they often need accommodations to work. Not always, but sometimes you'll have someone who acquires a disability while they're working, and to keep them working for you, you might have to provide a reasonable accommodation. In addition, this can be more of a psychological thing where persons who see that the agency is dedicated to having compliant procedures are going to want to stay at this agency, even if they don't actually need those accommodations.
And this raises another question, and that is the federal government is the source of regulations and rules for accommodating people in government and in the private sector with disabilities. It sounds like there are agencies that are not compliant in the first place.
We have a high level of compliance with our required policies and procedures for EEO programs. However, there are certain variables that you see lower compliance on and higher compliance on. We definitely want the agencies to be complying with the regulations. As we're seeing here, they can be effective in improving EEO.
Sure. And as a social science research analyst, would you then say you could derive from your results that if leadership and management cares about this, then the compliance and the full ability to accommodate people will follow, and then you'll have those fewer voluntary separations?
I would agree with that statement. To have a good program for accommodating persons with disabilities, you need leadership buy-in. So the more you have leadership buy-in, you're also going to have a more welcome environment for persons with disabilities and other employees.
We're speaking with Karen Brummond. She's a social science research analyst in the Office of Federal Operations at the EEOC. And what was your research methodology? Did you just look at, well, what did you compare and contrast to come up with these findings?
So we looked at 156 policies, procedures, and practices that federal agencies should have in place over 3 years to see if it affected the 2020 number of separations of persons with disabilities. We use some complex statistical methods, specifically negative binomial regression, if you're into that details.
Some of us are.
With that, we were able to see controlling for the number of employees at the agency and the separation rate of all employees at the agency. We were able to see whether these policies, procedures, and practices were associated with better retention.
And have you given this feedback to the agencies involved? Do they know how they're doing?
We do, on a regular basis, do technical assistance visits with the agencies to make sure that they're following the required policies, procedures, and practices. The specific ones that we're recommending here, we just published this report, so we're going to be doing a greater emphasis on this with more agencies, especially as we have found that these are the most effective practices for retaining persons with disabilities.
And associated with the report, you've got a really easy 8-point list of how to improve EEO and retention for people with disabilities. And as you mentioned, the top of the list is top leadership commitment. But top leaders come and go, so you probably have to go a little deeper than that. And you mentioned accountability, including goals to help guide and sustain efforts. What does that exactly mean?
When we talk about accountability, you first have to have some transparency so that people are actually tracking what's going on. And then with accountability, you also want to see that when something is going right, people get rewarded. When something is going wrong, people are told to find out why it's going wrong and improve upon it.
And what about the workforce that is there of people without disabilities? Probably they can help this effort also.
Absolutely. You need a supportive environment for people to want to stay with an employer. So if the colleagues are supportive of persons with disabilities and understanding that they'll need accommodations, it'll be a better workplace for everyone.
All right. And what other advice do you have? What else should agencies do? Sounds like they need to invest a little bit sometimes in technology.
Yes, definitely. They need technology. For accessibility, many people need certain technologies like screen readers, for example. They also will need to make sure they have interpreters for persons who are hard of hearing or deaf. Other things that they can do is having mentoring programs for any disadvantaged group. Mentoring programs have been shown to improve employment for persons who are either have disabilities or also other historically disadvantaged groups.
And there is at least one new requirement in the whole effort of regulations around people with disabilities that is people should know about.
In 2017, EEOC passed, we updated our regulations through a final rule titled Affirmative Action for Individuals with Disabilities in the Federal Government. Among other things, we started requiring that agencies provide personal assistance services for individuals who are qualified for the job and had disabilities and specific needs for personal assistance services. Since we found this to be an effective method in retaining persons with disabilities, it's really great to see that we're putting these regulations in place and they're actually effective.
All right, and we'll make sure people know about them. We'll have a link to them. Karen Brumman is a social science research analyst in the Office of Federal Operations at the EEOC. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll post this interview along with a link to her report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Hear the Federal Drive on demand. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.